In a packed Las Vegas arena, a viral sensation in the ring was about to face a legend he believed was long past his prime. The championship crowd roared until arrogance turned to silence when an undefeated MMA fighter challenged Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris wasn't your typical spectator. For over 60 years, he was a martial arts grandmaster, Air Force veteran, and cinematic icon known for defeating world champions and creating his own fighting discipline. When Ty, the Hurricane Jackson, mocked him live on mic and dared him into the cage, he didn't realize he just invited a living embodiment of discipline into a storm of his own making. Chuck stepped in with quiet control and responded with a single, flawless counter that would break a jawand, a persona. What began as post-fight trash talk would become a timeless lesson. The MMA world and one broken fighter would never forget the night silence struck harder than spectacle. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The air in the T-Mobile Arena crackled with electricity. 20,000 souls packed into tiered seating, their collective anticipation a living, breathing entity. Smartphones gleamed like stars in the darkened amphitheater, capturing everything for the millions who couldn't secure tickets to the year's most viral sporting event. The Legends vs. New Blood MMA Tournament Finals in Las Vegas. Elena Vega adjusted her headset, the scar tissue around her left eye catching the harsh lights of the commentary booth. 10 years ago, she'd been the one they'd all come to see, the first woman to headline this tournament. Now, as lead commentator, she watched the spectacle with practiced detachment. "And we're back live for the championship bout," she said into her microphone, voice steady and measured. "If you're just joining us, you've picked one hell of a night." The Hurricane has been living up to his name. Her co-commentator, a former heavyweight with hands like sledgehammers, leaned forward. "Ty Jackson is redefining what it means to dominate in this sport, Elena. Love him or hate him, the kid puts on a show." Elena's eyes narrowed slightly. "Skill and showmanship are different currencies, Mike. One lasts longer than the other." The arena darkened suddenly, drawing a collective gasp from the crowd. Laser lights sliced through artificial fog as bass-heavy entrance music thundered through speakers. On the massive screens hanging above the octagon, highlight reels played. A montage of brutal knockouts, each followed by the same figure strutting, taunting, dominating not just opponents but the very space around him. Ty, the Hurricane Jackson, emerged from the tunnel, arms spread wide, face split with a grin that belonged on a predator. At 26, his 12-0 record had made him the fastest rising star in the sport. 6'2" of sculpted muscle, adorned with tattoos that chronicled his victories, faces of defeated opponents stylized down his right arm. His eyes, cold blue beneath close-cropped platinum hair, surveyed the arena like he owned every inch of it. "The Hurricane has arrived." The announcer's voice boomed as Ty strutted toward the cage, high-fiving fans selectively, playing to cameras, drinking in the noise, half cheers, half boos, all attention. In the front row, almost invisible amidst the commotion, sat Chuck Norris. At 79, the lines on his face had deepened, but the famous beard remained impeccably trimmed. He wore simple clothes, dark jeans, a button-up shirt, a blazer. No entourage surrounded him. No security detail hovered nearby. He'd come alone, curious about this tournament that bridged generations. His stillness formed a stark contrast to the chaos erupting around him. Not far from Chuck, Raymond, Coach Ray Dawson, stood with the security team, his weathered face impassive beneath a standard-issue earpiece. Few recognized him now as the man who'd once been Chuck Norris's sparring partner. Even fewer knew he'd taken this job just to stay close to the sport he loved after his own fighting days ended. His eyes flicked briefly to Chuck. then back to the approaching hurricane. Across the cage, another fighter entered, with considerably less fanfare. Marcus, the Sentinel, cross-walked with the measured gait of a veteran. At 38, he was considered past his prime, but his record commanded respect. 27 wins, 5 losses, each battle earned through technique rather than spectacle. He entered without music, acknowledging the crowd with a simple nod. "The contrast couldn't be more stark," Elena commented. "Cross is old school. Discipline over drama." The pre-fight ritual began. Referee. Instructions. The traditional face-off. Ty towered over Marcus, leaning in too close, lips curled into a sneer. "Ready for retirement, old man?" Ty whispered, just loud enough for Marcus to hear. Marcus remained expressionless, eyes forward, centered in the moment. When the bell rang, Ty exploded forward like his namesake. His strikes came not as wild flurries, but as calculated destruction, each punch, each kick delivered with technical precision backed by theatrical flair. Marcus defended well initially, his experience evident in his movement. But Ty's youth and speed proved overwhelming. "The Sentinel's fighting smart," Elena observed, keeping his guard high, looking for counters. Midway through the first round, Ty began talking between combinations. "That all you got?" he taunted, loud enough for nearby cameras to pick up. "Thought legends were supposed to be tough," Marcus answered, with a sharp counter that almost found its mark. Ty slipped it effortlessly, his smirk widening. The crowd sensed the psychological warfare, tension building like a physical presence. Marcus adjusted his stance, centering himself, waiting for an opening. Ty pressed forward, relentless, like a force of nature. A fake left, a lightning-fast kick to the ribs, then a rush inside Marcus's guard hooks to the body, a sharp jab that snapped Marcus's head back. "This ain't your era anymore," Ty whispered as they clinched briefly. The end came with brutal efficiency, a combination that started with a feint, followed by a devastating right hook that connected with Marcus's jaw. The veteran's legs betrayed him, buckling as he fell backward. Ty followed with another punch before the referee could intervene. The official rushed between them, waving off the fight. Medical staff swarmed into the cage as Marcus lay still, consciousness returning slowly, eyes unfocused beneath the unforgiving lights. The arena erupted, fans on their feet, phones raised high, capturing the moment from every angle. But inside the cage, Ty barely acknowledged the victory. He was already performing, strutting along the perimeter, climbing the fence to flex for cameras, pointing at social media influencers in the front row. "And it's over," Mike announced. 1 minute, 47 seconds into the first round. Elena's voice remained measured. "A clinical finish, but I'm concerned about Cross. That follow-up strike was unnecessary." In the front row, Chuck Norris hadn't moved. His expression remained neutral, but his eyes tracked every movement, not just Ty's victory celebration, but the care being shown to the fallen fighter, the reaction of the crowd, the subtle shifts in energy throughout the arena. Ty jumped down from the fence, chest heaving more from adrenaline than exertion. He snatched the microphone from the ring announcer before the official decision could be read. "Vegas," he shouted, voice echoing through the speakers. "That's how it's done." He circled the cage like a conquering emperor, sweat glistening under the lights. "Any more so-called legends want to step up, or are they all collecting Social Security?" Some fans roared with approval. Others exchanged uncomfortable glances. The line between confidence and arrogance had been crossed so far back it was no longer visible. That's when Ty spotted Chuck Norris. The realization spread across his face like a slow sunrise widening of the eyes, followed by the predatory grin returning with new purpose. He moved to the side of the cage nearest Chuck, pointing directly at him. Well, His amplified voice cut through the noise. If it isn't the myth himself, Chuck Norris. The crowd's energy shifted instantly, heads turning, cameras swiveling toward Chuck. I grew up hearing all those Chuck Norris jokes. You know, the ones about how tough he is. Ty laughed, playing to the audience. But let me tell you something, folks. In here, he stamped his foot on the canvas. Jokes don't mean shit. This is reality. He leaned over the cage, eyes locked on Chuck. What do you say, old-timer? Want to see if those jokes hold up in real life? Or are you just here to watch what real fighters look like these days? A hush fell over the arena, the collective intake of breath from 20,000 people creating a vacuum of sound. Chuck Norris remained seated, utterly still, eyes fixed on Ty, with an unreadable expression. In that moment of silence, something shifted in the atmosphere, not tension exactly, but a strange, electric sense of possibility, as if the universe itself had paused to see what would happen next. In the breathless silence that followed Ty's challenge, Elena Vega's voice cut through the commentary booth microphone, though she'd lowered it to nearly a whisper. Ladies and gentlemen, I've seen a lot of post-fight antics in my career, but this... She paused, searching for words. Ty Jackson is calling out Chuck Norris. Not for a charity exhibition, not for a photo op-ed as a legitimate challenge. Her co-commentator leaned away from his microphone, eyes wide with disbelief. Is he insane? Chuck's almost 80. Elena's expression hardened. Age isn't the point here, Mike. It's about respecter. The complete lack of it. Down in the octagon, Ty's moment of triumph stretched into something uglier. Still holding the microphone, still breathing heavily from his victory, he paced along the edge of the cage closest to Chuck. What's the matter? He called out, voice amplified throughout the arena. Carlos Ray Norris, the great legend, has nothing to say? He wiped sweat from his brow with a taped wrist, feeding off the discomfort rippling through the crowd. Let me guess, Walker. Texas Ranger isn't allowed to fight without his stunt double? The audience's reaction fractured. Some younger fans laughed nervously. Others, particularly those old enough to remember Chuck in his prime, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few booed. Ty wasn't finished. You know what the difference is between you and me, Chuck? Your fights were choreographed. Mine are real. He gestured toward Marcus Cross, who was now sitting up, attended by medics. You see that? That's what happens when someone faces me. No second takes. No camera tricks. Near the cage entrance, Coach Ray Dawson's weathered face darkened. He touched his earpiece, murmuring something to another security team member, then moved closer to the gate. His eyes flicked between Ty and Chuck, calculating, remembering things most people in this arena had never seen. The tournament director appeared at his side, panic evident. Ray, this isn't part of the program. We need to shut this down. Ray's voice was quiet, eyes never leaving Chuck. Just wait. But the liability, I said, wait. In the commentary booth, Elena leaned forward. For those unfamiliar with Chuck Norris beyond the internet memes, we're talking about a legitimate martial arts pioneer. 6-time world karate champion. The first Westerner in the 1,000-year history of Taekwondo to be awarded an 8th-degree black belt. This isn't just some action movie star Ty is mocking. Mike nodded. And he's not just a fighter. The man created his own martial art, Chun Kuk Do, combining elements from every discipline he mastered. He's trained world champions, law enforcement, military personnel. Exactly, Elena said, her voice taking on an edge. So what we're witnessing isn't just disrespect. It's profound ignorance. In the octagon, Ty was feeding off the energy. His victory high merging with the satisfaction of having all eyes on him. He hadn't expected the old man to respond. This was just theater. Content for his social media channels. Another way to build his brand as the fighter who feared no one. Hey Chuck. he continued, bouncing lightly on his feet. Remember when you said real fighters respect each other? Well, welcome to 2025, old man. Respect doesn't sell pay-per-views. This does. He threw a flashy combination at the air, drawing cheers from some fans. Then something changed in the atmosphere. A subtle shift in energy that Ty, drunk on adrenaline and attention, failed to notice at first. It started in the front row. People who had been watching Ty's performance suddenly turned their heads. Camera operators swiveled their lenses. A murmur began to spread through the crowd like ripples in still water. Chuck Norris had moved. Not dramatically, not with any flair. He had simply placed his hands on his knees and risen to his feet. He stood calmly, his posture straight but relaxed, eyes fixed on Ty. He made no gesture toward the cage. He didn't speak. He simply stood and waited. The ripple of awareness reached Ty mid-sentence. He faltered, noticing the audience's attention shifting away from him. Following their gaze, he saw Chuck standing there, small by comparison to the modern fighters, but somehow commanding the entire arena's focus without saying a word. Ty's grin widened. This was even better than he'd hoped. Well, look at that, he announced, playing to the cameras again. Chuck Norris is standing up. Maybe there's some fight left in the fossil after all. But his words seemed to fall flat now. The crowd's energy had transformed. Some began to chant softly at first, then with growing volume. Chuck! 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 At the security gate, Ray Dawson spoke quietly to his team. If he walks over here, you open that door. No questions asked. But sir, the insurance policies, the liability. Ray's eyes never left Chuck. You ever seen a lightning strike up close? That's what you're about to witness. Now do as I say. Elena Vega's voice dropped lower in the commentary booth. Something's happening here. Something none of us expected. Chuck began to walk. Not toward the cage, not yet. But to the older man, seated next to him, tournament official. He leaned down, spoke a few quiet words. The official's eyes widened, but he nodded. Chuck then removed his blazer and handed it to the man. Beneath it, he wore a simple black button-up shirt that, while not tight, revealed a physique that defied his age. He rolled his shoulders once, loosening them, then turned toward the cage. The chant grew louder. Chuck! 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 Ty was trying to regain control of the moment, but he sensed it slipping away. He hadn't expected this. A dismissive wave, perhaps. Maybe even an angry retort. But not this calm, purposeful advance. Hey, someone tell Grandpa this isn't a senior center. He called into the microphone, but his voice had lost some of its edge. You need a walker to get up these steps, Chuck. Chuck continued his approach, unhurried. The crowd parted before him, smartphones recording his every step. His face remained composed, not angry, not even determined, just focused. Ray met him at the cage door, exchanging a glance that contained decades of shared history. No words passed between them. None were needed. Ray simply nodded to the security staff, who unlocked the gate. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Ladies and gentlemen, Elena's voice trembled slightly. Chuck Norris is approaching the cage. I honestly don't know what we're about to witness. But make no mistake, this wasn't planned. This isn't part of the show. In the center of the octagon, Ty was experiencing something unfamiliar. Uncertainty. The script he'd been following, the one where he was the star, the one in control, was being rewritten before his eyes. He covered it with bravado, raising the microphone again. All right, folks. Looks like we've got ourselves a senior moment. Chuck Norris thinks he's going to step in here with the hurricane. He laughed, but it sounded hollow even to his own ears. Someone call the retirement home, they're missing a resident. Chuck reached the steps leading up to the cage. He paused, one hand on the railing. For the first time, he looked at Ty directly, gaze so focused it seemed to cut through the space between them. The arena fell silent again. Ty felt something cold slide down his spine. This close, he could see Chuck's eyes clearly calm, evaluating, seeing through the performance to something Ty himself didn't fully understand. Coach Ray appeared at Chuck's side, speaking quietly. "You sure about this, old friend?" Chuck's response was barely audible, meant for Ray alone. Sometimes the young need to learn the old lessons. He began to climb the steps. The gate swung open with a metallic creak that echoed through the now hushed arena. Chuck Norris stepped onto the canvas with the same deliberate calm that had characterized his approach. No grandstanding. No playing to the crowd. He moved like a man entering his own living room. The official scrambled after him, clipboard in hand, panic evident in his hurried gestures. "Mr. Norris, sir, you can't, we need waivers, medical clearance." Chuck raised a hand slightly, not dismissively, but with quiet authority. The official fell silent mid-sentence. In the cage, Ty Jackson's performance faltered again. He'd wanted Chuck to react to his taunts with anger, with indignation, with something he could mock further. This unshakable composure wasn't part of his script. He recovered quickly, showman's instinct taking over. "Well, folks," he announced, volume compensating for confidence. "Looks like Grandpa Chuck is actually coming in for his beating. This isn't something you see every day, a living fossil volunteering for extinction." Elena Vega leaned forward in the commentary booth. Professionalism temporarily forgotten. "Mike, I've never seen anything like this in my 15 years in combat sports." Mike nodded, equally transfixed. "Totally unprecedented. The legal team must be having heart attacks." "But look at Chuck," Elena whispered. "Just look at him." Chuck stood just inside the cage now, hands relaxed at his sides. He hadn't assumed a fighting stance, hadn't removed his shoes, hadn't even rolled up his sleeves. He simply stood, a small half-smile playing at the corners of his mouth, not mocking, not even confident. Peaceful. Across the canvas, Ty felt his bravado curdling into something unfamiliar. The Hurricane was accustomed to intimidating opponents before the first punch was thrown, using his size, his intensity, his unpredictability to establish psychological dominance. But the old man wasn't playing the game. Wasn't reacting. Wasn't afraid. Ty circled to his left, exaggerating his movements, playing to the crowd that had gone strangely quiet. "Come on, Chuck! Show me one of those spinning kicks from your movies!" He threw a flashy spin kick of his own, stopping short of where Chuck stood. "Or maybe you need a stunt double for those too?" Chuck didn't move. Didn't flinch. His smile remained unchanged. "Folks," Elena's voice was hushed, "what we're seeing isn't just a confrontation between fighters, it's a clash of eras, of philosophies. The old school versus the new." Mike agreed. Quiet discipline versus social media stardom. In the cage, Ty's performance grew more exaggerated, more desperate. He shadowboxed, threw combinations at the air, each more elaborate than the last. "This is real fighting, old man," he shouted. "Not that choreographed bullshit you did in the 80s. Still, Chuck remained motionless. The silence stretched, becoming uncomfortable. Even Ty's most ardent supporters in the crowd had fallen quiet, sensing that something significant was unfolding, something beyond trash talk and spectacle. Finally, Chuck moved. He took 3 steps forward, unhurried, measured. The distance between them closed. He stopped at arm's length from Ty, looking up at the taller, heavier, younger man without a trace of concern. Then he spoke, his voice so quiet that only Ty could hear him clearly. "Son," he said, "true power doesn't need to announce itself." Something cold twisted in Ty's stomach. He had expected bravado, anger, fear, emotions he could use, could manipulate. Not this quiet certainty. This pity? He lashed out verbally, falling back on his most reliable weapon. "Listen up, old man," he snarled, loud enough for nearby microphones to catch. "I don't care about your fortune cookie wisdom. This is my world now. My cage. My rules." For the first time, Chuck's expression changed not to anger, but to something more troubling. Disappointment. Like a teacher who had hoped for better from a promising student. "Your world," Chuck echoed softly. "Is it making you happy, son?" The question hit Ty like a physical blow. Memories flashed. Unbidden, his father screaming from outside the ring, 8-year-old Ty crying after losing his first bout. "Get back in there and hurt him or don't come home!" The years of training not for love of the sport but fear of failure. The persona he'd built like armor, growing heavier with each victory. He shook the thoughts away, anger rising to cover confusion. "Happy? I'm the champion. I'm living the dream while you're a walking punchline." Chuck nodded slightly, as if Ty had confirmed something. "Then show me this dream of yours." He took one step back and raised his hands not in a modern MMA stance, but in the traditional guard of Tang Sudo, his original discipline. His movements were fluid, effortless, his balance perfect. Ty blinked, the moment suddenly real in a way it hadn't been before. The old man was actually going to fight him. Here. Now. Before doctors could stop it. Before lawyers could intervene. For a heartbeat. Doubt flickered across Ty's face, visible only to those watching closely. To Chuck, who missed nothing. To Elena in the commentary booth, who had experienced enough battles to recognize the moment a fighter realizes they've made a terrible mistake. "He's going to do it," she whispered into her microphone. "Chuck Norris, at 79 years old, is about to step into combat with the undefeated Hurricane." Mike shook his head in disbelief. "This can't be happening. The commission would never." "The commission isn't in that cage," Elena cut in. "And neither is time, apparently." Ty recovered, showman to the end. He raised his hands high, playing to the crowd. "You asked for it, old man. Don't say I didn't warn you." The crowd found its voice again, but the chant had changed. "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" The sound filled the arena, drowning out the officials shouting for security. The tournament director's panicked orders. The lawyers rushing toward the cage. 20,000 witnesses to a moment that transcended sport, transcended entertainment, a moment of pure, unscripted truth about to unfold between generations. Ty circled left again, hands up in his trademark loose guard. In his mind, he was already mapping the story he'd tell after this. How he'd gone easy on the old legend. How he'd made it last for the fans. How merciful he'd been. Chuck remained centered, his stance traditional, but his eyes alive with something Ty had never encountered before. Complete presence. No fear. No ego. No hesitation. Just this moment. Nothing else. The referee, caught in the surreality of the situation, looked from one fighter to the other, then to the officials outside the cage. No one seemed to know what protocol to follow. This wasn't in any rulebook. In that moment of confusion, Ty made his move. Ty lunged forward with explosive speed, closing the distance in a heartbeat. His right hand shot out in a straight jab aimed at Chuck's face, not his hardest punch, but a rangefinder, intended to establish dominance and create openings for the devastating combinations that had built his highlight reel. It connected with empty air. Chuck had shifted just slightly, just enough, his upper body leaning back mere inches, allowing the punch to sail past his face. No wasted movement. No dramatic evasion. Just not being where the punch was. Before Ty could process this, Chuck's right hand tapped his extended arm, redirecting it further off course. A block, Not a parry, but something subtler. A guidance. Tai stumbled slightly, thrown off balance by hitting nothing when he'd expected resistance. He recovered quickly, muscle memory taking over, and threw a left hook that would have caught most opponents clean on the temple. Again, Chuck wasn't there. A slight shift of weight, a subtle duck, and the hook whistled over his head. This time, Chuck's counter came as a light, open-handed strike to Tai's ribs, not intended to damage, but to educate. "What the hell are we watching?" Mike whispered in the commentary booth. Elena's eyes narrowed. Professional analysis, breaking through her awe. Economy of motion. No wasted energy. Chuck isn't moving like someone avoiding punches, he's moving like someone who knew where the punches would be before Tai threw them. In the cage, Tai's frustration mounted. He launched a combination jab, cross, hook, uppercut, each strike thrown with technical precision and increasing force. Chuck slipped the jab, redirected the cross, ducked the hook, and stepped inside the uppercut. His counter this time was a light tap to Tai's solar plexus again, instructive rather than destructive. "Stand still and fight," Tai growled, abandoning his performance for the cameras, focus narrowing to this inexplicable obstacle before him. Chuck's half-smile remained unchanged. "I am fighting, son." I exploded again, this time with a flying knee that would have ended most bouts instantly. Chuck sidestepped with mathematical precision, and as Tai landed, slightly overextended, Chuck delivered a sharp, controlled strike to his kidney, the first blow with genuine force behind it. Pain blossomed across Tai's side. Not debilitating, but shocking in its precision. He whirled, throwing a wide hook born of frustration rather than technique. Chuck caught his wrist in mid-swing. Time seemed to freeze. Tai found himself locked in place, unable to complete the punch, unable to retract it. The old man's grip was like iron wrapped in velvet, immovable but not crushing. "Fighting isn't about domination," Chuck said quietly, holding Tai's gaze. "It's about self-mastery." He released Tai's wrist and stepped back, resuming his relaxed guard. Outside the cage, officials were frantically trying to restore order. The tournament director was shouting into his phone. Security personnel clustered at the gate, unsure whether to intervene. Coach Ray stood before them like a human barricade. Arms crossed. Expression daring anyone to try. "Let it play out," he said simply. In the commentary booth, Elena was on her feet. Professionalism forgotten. "Mike, what we're seeing isn't a fight in the conventional sense. It's a lesson." "The Hurricanes landed nothing clean," Mike confirmed, equally transfixed. "Chuck's making him miss by millimeters, not inches. It's like watching a mathematician solve equations in real time." Tai reset, breathing harder now, not from exertion, but from mounting frustration. He'd never encountered this before. An opponent who seemed to read his intentions before he acted on them, who moved without urgency, yet was never where Tai's strikes landed. He changed tactics, throwing a front kick designed to create distance, followed by a spinning back fist that had become one of his signature moves. The kick pushed air. The back fist encountered only empty space, as Chuck ducked smoothly beneath it. This time, Chuck countered with purpose, a clean, sharp jab that snapped Tai's head back, followed by a straight right to the solar plexus that forced the air from his lungs in an audible whoosh. Tai staggered back, genuine shock registering on his face. The strikes had been perfectly placed, carrying just enough force to sting without causing serious damage. More messages than attacks. The arena had fallen completely silent. 20,000 people holding their breath collectively, witnessing something beyond sport, something approaching art. "The precision," Elena whispered. "The control. He's not trying to hurt." Tai could have ended this already if he wanted to. Tai's face darkened, humiliation fueling anger. The persona he'd cultivated, the hurricane, unstoppable force of nature, was being dismantled, not with superior power, but with its opposite, calm, economical movement that made his own attacks look wasteful, excessive. He launched forward again, abandoning strategy for raw aggression, a flurry of strikes thrown with full force, each intended to end the embarrassment with one conclusive blow. Jab, cross, hook, uppercut, elbow, knee, a sequence that had broken opponents before. Chuck moved through the onslaught like water flowing around stones. Each strike redirected, each intended point of impact vacant by millimeters when Ty's fists or feet arrived. No dramatic evasions, no showy counters, just efficient, minimal movements guided by decades of knowledge written into muscle and bone. As Ty overextended on a wild hook, Chuck delivered another counter. This time a short elbow strike to the sternum that stopped Ty in his tracks, followed by a sweep that took his feet from under him. Ty hit the canvas hard, breath knocked from his lungs. Not injured, but disoriented, humiliated. Before the referee could intervene, Chuck stepped back, hands lowered, giving Ty space to rise. "You can stop this any time, son," he said quietly. No shame in learning. Something snapped in Ty. The careful persona, the calculated arrogance, all of it fell away, revealing the raw, wounded core beneath. The 8-year-old boy desperate for approval. The teenager whose father measured love in victories. The man who'd built an identity on being feared, being dominant, being the one who hurt others before they could hurt him. He rose slowly, eyes burning with an emotion beyond anger. "I don't need your fucking lessons, old man." Chuck nodded, sadness flickering across his features. "I know. That's why you need them most." Ty charged one final time, all technique abandoned, all pretense shed. Just raw fury given physical form. Ty's charge was Primala roar tearing from his throat as he closed the distance. This was no longer about winning, no longer about putting on a show. It was about salvaging something from the ruins of his carefully constructed image. About proving to himself, more than anyone else, that he wasn't being dismantled this easily. His right hand cocked back, everything he had channeled into one devastating hook aimed at Chuck's jaw. Time seemed to slow. Chuck watched Ty's approach with that same calm, that same presence that had characterized his every movement. In his eyes was neither fear nor anger, only recognition. He'd seen this moment before, had lived through it from both sides across decades of martial arts practice. The moment when ego collapses, when technique gives way to desperation. As Ty's punch launched, telegraphed by his wide stance, by the rotation of his shoulder, by the flickering of his eyes, Chuck made his decision. He stepped forward rather than back, moving into the punch rather than away from it. His left hand rose, not to block but to guide, fingertips lightly touching Ty's forearm, redirecting the hook's trajectory by mere degrees. Simultaneously, he pivoted slightly, turning his body sideways to present a narrower target. Ty's fist sailed past Chuck's chin by millimeters. In that same fluid motion, as Ty's momentum carried him forward and off balance, Chuck delivered the counter that would end things. A perfect, compact right hook that connected with surgical precision against Ty's jaw. The impact made a sound that cut through the arena's silence, not the dull thud of gloved knuckles, but the sharp crack of bone meeting bone at exactly the right angle, with exactly the right force. Ty's eyes went wide with shock. For a fraction of a second, he remained upright, consciousness departing before his body registered the fact. Then, his legs gave way. He collapsed like a marionette with severed strings, falling first to his knees, then toppling sideways onto the canvas. Complete stillness followed. For 3 heartbeats, the arena held its collective breath. 20,000 witnesses frozen in a moment that transcended sport, a moment that reached back to ancient traditions of combat, where victory wasn't measured in points or purses, but in lessons transmitted through flesh and bone. In those suspended seconds, Chuck remained perfectly still, his striking hand already returned to guard position. No celebration, no exultation, only calm acknowledgement of what had transpired. The hook that had dropped Ty wasn't thrown in anger or retribution. It contained no malice, no desire to humiliate. Like a surgeon's scalpel, it had been delivered with precisely the force required to accomplish its purpose, no more, no less. Those closest to the cage, photographers, officials, front-row spectators, would later struggle to describe what they saw in Chuck's eyes in that moment. Not triumph. Not satisfaction exactly. Something closer to compassion. The expression of a teacher who had administered a necessary but difficult lesson. The spell broke as the referee finally lurched into motion, rushing toward Ty's prone form. Medical staff converged at the cage door, equipment in hand. Years of training kicking in despite the unprecedented nature of the situation. "Get me in there," the chief medical officer shouted, pushing past stunned officials. "Now!" Behind them, lawyers and tournament executives exchanged panicked glances, already calculating liability, precedent, possible lawsuits. Insurance representatives reached for phones. Public relations staff froze, wondering how to frame what had just occurred. None of it touched Chuck. He stood in the eye of the hurricane, untouched by the chaos beginning to swirl around him. The referee knelt beside Ty, checking his vitals with practiced efficiency. The young fighter was already stirring, consciousness returning in fragments, eyes blinking against the harsh arena lights. Confusion clouded his features, followed by the first waves of pain as nerve endings reported the damage. "Don't move him," the medical officer instructed as she entered the cage, neck brace in hand. "Possible cervical injury. Standard protocol." But her eyes told a different story as she glanced at Chuck, still standing calmly nearby. Professional assessment warring with disbelief. She'd treated hundreds of fighters, had seen every manner of knockout, but never one delivered with such perfect control, such precise limitation of force. Ty groaned, attempting to rise despite the hands gently restraining him. His jaw hung at an unnatural angle, already swelling visibly, but it was the expression in his eyes that captured the true injury, the shattered certainty, the collapsed foundation of identity. And then, as if released from a collective trance, the arena erupted. "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" The chant started in the lower sections and spread outward in concentric waves, gaining volume with each repetition. Not just loud, deafening, primal. 20,000 voices united in witnessing something they knew instinctively they would never see again. Phones raised high, capturing the aftermath of a moment that would circulate across social media within seconds. That would be dissected frame by frame for years to come. Some fans pressed against barriers, trying to get closer. Others remained seated, stunned into immobility. Veterans of the sport, fighters, coaches, lifelong fans found themselves unexpectedly moved, many with tears streaming unashamedly down their faces. "What did we just see?" a retired heavyweight champion whispered to his son in the third row. That wasn't just fighting. That was something else. In the VIP section, celebrities and influencers who had come for the spectacle, for the Instagram opportunities, found themselves caught in something authentic. Something that transcended their carefully curated realities. A famous action star who'd built a career on choreographed combat sat motionless, phone forgotten in his lap, a complex mix of emotions playing across his face, perhaps recognizing the gulf between performance and mastery. In the commentary booth, Elena and Mike sat in stunned silence for several seconds before Elena found her voice. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, not bothering to hide the emotion in her tone, "what we just witnessed defies explanation. Chuck Norris, at 79 years old, I don't even have words for what we just saw." Mike shook his head, equally awestruck. One punch, Elena. Clean, precise, perfect. Not thrown in anger. Not thrown to damage. Thrown to teach. The most controlled knockout I've ever seen. Elena agreed, leaning forward in her seat. He could have ended it earlier. Could have hurt Ty badly. But he deliberately chose the most humane way to deliver the lesson. She paused, struggling to contextualize what had transpired. For those who might not understand the technical aspect of what just happened, Chuck didn't just counter Ty's punch. He guided it first, redirected it, then used Ty's own momentum to maximize the efficiency of his counter. That's not just fighting skill. That's decades of mastery, of understanding the physics of combat at a level most fighters never reach. Mike nodded, finding his analytical footing. The economy of motion was breathtaking. No wasted energy. No unnecessary movement. When you've been around combat sports as long as we have, you develop an eye for true mastery. This was watching Michelangelo paint. Watching Einstein solve an equation. And notice what Chuck isn't doing, Elena added, her voice softening. He's not celebrating. Not playing to the crowd. Not milking the moment. Look at him. The camera zoomed in on Chuck, still standing calmly as medical staff worked on Ty. His breathing was even, his posture relaxed. No adrenaline surge. No fighter's high. His eyes remained focused on Ty, monitoring the medical attention with quiet concern. In the cage, Chuck stepped back from the fallen fighter, giving the medical team space to work. One of the doctors glanced up at him with an expression approaching awe. The jaw's dislocated, Chuck said quietly, only those closest to him able to hear over the continuing roar of the crowd. No fracture. The doctor blinked in surprise. How can you possibly know? Impact vibration, Chuck replied simply. You feel it differently when bone breaks. He'll need it reset and immobilized, but full recovery should take only a few weeks. The medical officer stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly, turning back to her patient with renewed focus. Chuck's assessment wasn't a guess it, was a diagnosis delivered with the certainty of someone who had spent a lifetime studying the exact mechanics of how bodies moved, how they resisted force, how they broke, and how they healed. Outside the cage, officials were now engaged in heated debate. Security personnel shifting uncertainly between them. The tournament director, a former fighter himself, watched Chuck with an expression caught between panic and reverence. We should be shutting this down, a lawyer insisted, clutching a tablet displaying what appeared to be insurance policies. Getting statements. Damage control. Shut up, the director said quietly, not taking his eyes off Chuck. Just shut up and watch. Inside the octagon, Ty was now sitting up, supported by medical staff, reality crashing back in waves. Pain, confusion, humiliation. His team shouted from outside the cage, trainers, managers, entourage, their voices a cacophony of panic and outrage. He can't do that. We're pressing charges. Get the cameras out. But Ty himself remained silent, partly from necessity due to his injury, partly because words had deserted him. His eyes, however, spoke volumes as they fixed on Chuck Hanger, giving way to something more complex. Not acceptance, not yet respect, but the first fracture in a wall of arrogance that had been years in the building. Chuck glanced once around the arena, taking in the pandemonium, the sea of phones capturing every moment, the officials rushing toward him with expressions ranging from awe to panic. None of it seemed to touch him. He existed in the moment, completely present, neither rejecting the adulation nor drinking it in. His eyes found Coach Ray at the cage door. A lifetime of shared experience passed between them in that glance, acknowledgement of something completed. A circle closed. Ray nodded once, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. They had both seen this moment before. From the other side, the hard lesson that breaks through armor, that creates the possibility of true growth. In that silent exchange lay decades of history. They had been young once too, had built their own armor of arrogance, had encountered teachers who dismantled it with quiet efficiency, had learned, eventually, that true strength lay not in domination but in control, not in victory, but in mastery of self. Chuck turned and walked toward the exit, his gait unhurried, his expression serene. No raised arms in victory, no playing to the crowd. Nothing to prove, nothing to celebrate beyond the quiet satisfaction of a necessary task completed with precision. "He's leaving," Elena whispered into her microphone, her professional detachment temporarily abandoned. No interview, no victory lap, just walking away. Mike shook his head in disbelief. In an era of self-promotion, of cultivating the moment, of milking every second of fame, he's just walking away. "Because it was never about fame," Elena replied softly. "Never about proving anything to us. This was between him and Ty, between generations, between philosophies." The crowd's chant followed Chuck, echoing throughout the arena, but he seemed almost unaware of it, focused instead on each step, each breath, completely present in the moment. Security parted before him as he reached the gate. Officials who had been rushing to intervene now stood aside, uncertain what protocol could possibly apply to what they'd just witnessed. The tournament director, clipboard clutched to his chest, opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, words failing him. Only Coach Ray stepped forward, meeting Chuck at the exit. No embrace, no dramatic reunion, just the quiet acknowledgement between men who had traveled the same path. As Chuck passed through the gate, a young security guard, himself a martial arts student, found the courage to speak. "Mr. Norris," he said, voice barely audible above the continuing roar, "that was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Chuck paused briefly, regarding the young man with gentle eyes. He placed a hand lightly on the guard's shoulder, not in condescension, but in recognition of a fellow traveler. "The technique isn't the beautiful part," he said quietly. "It's knowing when to use it, and why." The simple wisdom of those words struck the guard with physical force. Later, he would have the quote tattooed across his ribs, a permanent reminder of the night he glimpsed the true meaning of martial arts. In the cage, the medical team had now fitted Ty with a temporary brace to immobilize his jaw. He was on his feet, unsteady but determined, pushing away helping hands with stubborn pride. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, his eyes still glazed with shock, but something was happening beneath the surface, something profound and private. He watched Chuck's exit with an expression impossible to categorize. Not hatred, though that element existed. Not respect, though that seed had been planted. Something more primal, the recognition of having encountered a force of nature, of having been humbled not by luck or circumstance, but by something essential and unchangeable. His coach climbed into the ring, face flushed with anger. "This is bullshit, Ty. We're filing a complaint. There are rules, protocols." Ty shook his head once, a sharp movement that made him wince in pain. He gestured toward the exit where Chuck had disappeared, then made a cutting motion with his hand. "No. Let it go." The coach stared at him in disbelief. "Are you serious? After what just happened? That old man assaulted you. Your brand, your image." Again, Ty shook his head, more forcefully despite the pain. His eyes had changed, something fundamental shifting behind them. The persona he'd cultivated, the hurricane, destroyer of opponents, king of trash talk, seemed to have receded, revealing glimpses of the person beneath, the fighter who had once loved the discipline before the fame, the boy who had discovered in martial arts something pure before his father had twisted it into a quest for dominance. Carefully, one hand still supporting his injured jaw, Ty turned toward where Marcus Cross stood at the edge of the cage, the veteran fighter he had defeated and mocked earlier. Their eyes met, and Ty inclined his head slightly. Not a full bow, not yet capable of that humility, but an acknowledgement, the first step on a long road. Marcus's eyes widened in surprise, then softened with understanding. He returned the nod, recognition passing between them, the recognition that sometimes defeat contains more valuable lessons than victory. Outside the cage, the atmosphere had transformed. What had begun as a spectacle, as entertainment, had become something approaching revelation. The crowd's energy shifted from bloodlust to reverence, the primal satisfaction of witnessing not just physical domination but a deeper truth about power, about mastery, about the relationship between teacher and student that transcended generations. Fans who had come for violence found themselves contemplating discipline. Those who had come to cheer domination found themselves humbled by control. And those who understood martial arts not as sport but as philosophy felt a quiet vindication, a reminder that beneath the commercialization, the glorification of ego, the true essence remained unchanged, available to anyone willing to walk the harder path of self-mastery. As Ty limped toward the exit, following the path Chuck had taken minutes before, Elena's voice provided a final commentary. "We came expecting a fight," she said softly. "What we witnessed was a lesson, not just for Ty Jackson, but for all of us." Mike nodded slowly. The young gun versus the old master, tale as old as time. "But with a twist," Elena added, her voice carrying a new weight. "The old master wasn't trying to prove anything, wasn't fighting for ego or glory or revenge. He fought to teach. And that, perhaps, is the biggest lesson of all." In the tunnel leading away from the arena, Ty paused, leaning against the wall as the adrenaline ebbed, pain flooding in to replace it. The sounds of the crowd grew distant, his entourage's voices fading to white noise as his focus turned inward. In the stillness of that moment, surrounded by chaos yet somehow separate from it, Ty Jackson began the long, difficult process of reassessment, of seeing himself not as he had portrayed himself to be, but as he was. Not just a fighter, but a student. Not just a champion, but a human being, with much still to learn. The first step on a journey that had begun with a single perfect blow delivered not to destroy, but to awaken. The hallway leading to the locker rooms was eerily quiet compared to the continuing roar from the arena. Chuck Norris walked alongside Coach Ray. Neither man speaking now, comfortable in the silence of decades-long friendship. Their footsteps echoed against the concrete walls, creating a rhythm like a metronome, steady, unhurried, grounded. For Chuck, this corridor represented a passage between worlds. Behind him lay the spectacle, the noise, the hungry eyes of cameras and spectators. Before him, the quiet anonymity he had cultivated for years now. The transition required no adjustment for him. He moved through both realms with the same centered presence, unchanged by either extremity. Ray glanced sideways at his old friend, noting the perfect composure in his bearing. No elevated breathing, no tremor in the hands, no flush of victory on his features. At 79, Chuck Norris moved with the fluid economy of a man decades younger, yet possessed a stillness that only came with age. "You haven't lost a step," Ray observed quietly, breaking the silence. "If anything, you've gained a few." Chuck's mouth curved slightly. "Different steps now. Smaller, more precise." Ray nodded, understanding the deeper meaning. In their youth, they had chased power, speed, the dramatic techniques that impressed observers. Now they had learned that mastery lay in refinement, in reduction, not adding techniques, but distilling them to their essence. At the junction where the corridor split one way leading to the VIP exit, the other to the fighters' locker rooms, they paused. Distant shouts echoed from behind them as officials, medical staff, and media personnel struggled to restore order to an event that had veered dramatically off script. "You're not staying for the main event?" Ray asked, though he already knew the answer. Chuck shook his head slightly. "Never intended to. Just came to watch the young fighters. See what's changed." A ghost of a smile crossed his features. "What hasn't?" Ray nodded, understanding. "You made your point pretty clearly." "Not my point to make," Chuck replied, his voice carrying quiet conviction. "The lesson was already there. I just illustrated it." Ray chuckled, the sound rumbling deep in his chest. "That's one way to put it." He hesitated, then added, "The kid needed it. Been watching his rise for a while now. All flash, no foundation. Using fear, instead of respect, to build his reputation." "He's talented," Chuck acknowledged. "Raw material is there. Just took the wrong path. Think he'll find the right one now?" Chuck's eyes grew distant, contemplative. "That's not for me to say. We all face the same crossroads. Some need to hit the wall harder than others before they see it." The philosophical observation hung between them two men who had devoted their lives to an art form that was, at its core, about more than combat. About the forging of character through discipline. About finding strength not in domination but in self-mastery. Heavy footsteps behind them interrupted their conversation. They turned to see Ty Jackson staggering down the hallway, one hand still cradling his dislocated jaw, eyes burning with a complex mixture of emotions: humiliation, anger, confusion, and something harder to name. Perhaps the first glimmer of understanding. His entourage trailed several paces behind trainers, managers, a public relations specialist already crafting damage control statements on her tablet. Ty had outpaced them, driven by something his team couldn't comprehend. A need to confront not just his defeater, but the reality his defeat had exposed. Chuck watched his approach without surprise, as if he'd been expecting this moment. Ray tensed slightly, ready to intervene if necessary. But Chuck placed a calming hand on his friend's shoulder. "It's all right," he said quietly. "This part matters too." Ray studied his friend's face, then nodded once, stepping back slightly but remaining within reach. He recognized the moment for what it was. Not a potential confrontation, but the necessary completion of what had begun in the cage. The lesson wasn't over. Ty stopped several feet away, swaying slightly. Up close, the physical damage was more evident: the jaw clearly out of alignment, a trickle of blood at the corner of his mouth, the glazed look of someone still processing a concussion. But it was the psychological damage that showed most clearly: the shattered persona, the stripped-away armor of arrogance. For several seconds, he simply stared at Chuck, unable to speak due to his injury. Perhaps unable to find words, even if he could have voiced them. His breathing came in shallow bursts, his uninjured hand clenching and unclenching at his side. Behind him, his manager called out, "Ty, don't do anything stupid. The lawyers are all ready." Ty raised his hand sharply, cutting the man off without turning around. His focus remained entirely on Chuck, his gaze searching the older man's face for what? Triumph? Contempt? Validation? He found none of these. Chuck met his gaze steadily, without hostility, without judgment, the same calm presence he'd maintained throughout their encounter. His eyes held neither victory nor sympathy, but something Ty had rarely encountered: simple recognition. The acknowledgement of one human being seeing another clearly, without projection or pretense. In that moment of genuine seeing, something shifted within Ty. The narrative he'd constructed that he was being mocked, that he'd been humiliated for others' entertainment, collapsed under the weight of truth. There was no mockery in the old man's eyes, no desire to humiliate. Only the quiet certainty of someone who had walked a longer road and recognized a fellow traveler at an earlier stage of the journey. Finally, Ty did something neither man expected. He bowed. Not deeply, his balance was too compromised for that, but unmistakably, the gesture of respect ingrained in martial arts traditions worldwide. The movement sent fresh pain lancing through his jaw, but he held the position for a moment, eyes lowered. Chuck returned the bow with perfect form, the motion fluid and natural, ingrained through tens of thousands of repetitions across 6 decades. When he straightened, he found Ty's eyes filling with tears, not of pain, but of recognition. "Medical's that way," Chuck said gently, pointing down the corridor toward the infirmary. "Ice for 20 minutes. Then they'll need to reset that jaw. It'll heal clean if you follow their instructions." Ty nodded once, a sharp movement that made him wince. "The other stuff," Chuck continued, his voice still gentle but carrying weight, "that takes longer to heal. But it can, if you let it." He reached out slowly, telegraphing the movement to avoid startling the injured fighter, and placed a hand lightly on Ty's shoulder. The touch contained no condescension, no false compassion, just the simple human connection between two practitioners of the same discipline. "Ego is the heaviest weight we carry," Chuck said quietly. Words meant for Ty alone. Heaviest to pick up, hardest to put down. Ty's eyes widened slightly at the unexpected wisdom. Through the haze of pain and concussion, the words penetrated, striking something fundamental within him. Unbidden, memories surfaced, his father's harsh voice after his first tournament loss at age 8. "Winners don't cry. Winners don't show weakness. Winners make others fear them." The lessons that had shaped him, twisted him, driven him to build the persona of the Hurricane. Chuck saw the recognition in Ty's eyes and nodded once, his expression softening further. "You're a fighter. That's not in question. But what kind of fighter you become from here, that's still being written." Their eyes held for another moment, teacher and reluctant student, separated by generations but connected now by shared experience. Then Ty turned away, moving with careful steps toward the medical area, brushing past his bewildered entourage without acknowledgement. Chuck watched him go, something like satisfaction settling in his features. Not for the victory, but for the seed planted. "He might actually learn something," Ray observed, surprised. "Maybe," Chuck replied. "That's up to him now." As Ty disappeared around the corner, his manager approached cautiously, tablet in hand. "Mr. Norris," he began, his voice a practiced blend of deference and authority, "we need to discuss what just happened. The potential legal implications." "No, we don't," Ray interrupted, stepping forward. "Chuck's done here." The manager persisted, his professional smile tightening. "With all due respect, an unsanctioned physical altercation just occurred on live television. Millions in sponsorships are at stake. Mr. Jackson's reputation will survive," Chuck said calmly. "Might even be better for it." The manager blinked, thrown off. "Script. I don't think you understand the situation." "I understand perfectly," Chuck replied, his tone unchanged, but somehow carrying greater weight. "Your client called me into that cage. I accepted the invitation. Whatever happened after that was between practitioners of the same discipline. But the contract specifications, the liability clauses." Ray stepped closer, his weathered face hardening. "The man said he's done here. I suggest you focus on getting your fighter proper medical attention instead of worrying about sponsor dollars." The manager opened his mouth to protest further, then closed it, reassessing the situation. The calm certainty in Chuck's eyes, the unmovable presence of Ray beside him, there would be no concessions here, no apologies, no signatures on hastily prepared statements. "Fine," he said finally, his voice tight. "But this isn't over. Expect to hear from our legal team." Chuck's expression didn't change. "I expect nothing," he said simply. The dismissal was gentle but absolute. The manager retreated, already typing furiously on his tablet. rejoining the cluster of Ty's team members now gathered outside the medical area. Chuck and Ray resumed walking toward the VIP exit, where a car would be waiting to take Chuck back to his hotel. Behind them, the corridor filled with noise as officials, media personnel, and security finally caught up, all clamoring with questions, concerns, legal implications. Ray held them back with an outstretched arm and a glare that brooked no argument. "Give the man some space, for Christ's sake." The crowd hesitated, momentum broken by Ray's command presence. In the relative quiet that followed, Chuck glanced at his old friend. "You coming to the ranch next month?" Anniversary gathering. The sudden shift to everyday matters, the complete absence of drama or lingering on what had just transpired, this was Chuck, as Ray had always known him. Present in the moment, then moving to the next without carrying unnecessary baggage. Ray's weathered face softened. 30 years since we opened the dojo. Wouldn't miss it." "Good," Chuck said simply. "Bring your granddaughter. I hear she's showing promise in Taekwondo." "Takes after her grandfather." Ray grinned. "Stubborn as a mule, twice as determined." The conversation settled into the comfortable rhythm of old friends, discussing family, shared memories, future plans as if what had occurred minutes earlier in the cage was already integrated, already part of the continuous flow of experience, rather than something exceptional to dwell upon. They reached the exit, where a tournament official waited with Chuck's blazer, retrieved from where he'd left it in the arena. The young woman's hands trembled slightly as she held it out, her eyes wide with barely contained awe. "Mr. Norris," she began, voice unsteady. "The director wants to know if you'd be willing to make a statement for the press. They're gathering in the media room and—" "No statement," Chuck interrupted gently, taking the blazer from her. "Thank you. But sir, what should I tell them about what happened in there?" Her expression betrayed genuine confusion, a need to understand the extraordinary event she'd witnessed. Chuck considered this as he slipped on his blazer, adjusting the collar with unhurried movements. His eyes, when they met hers, contained a warmth that took her by surprise. "Tell them whatever you saw," he said finally. "Truth doesn't need my endorsement." The simplicity of the statement struck her with unexpected force. Later, she would repeat these words to the assembled press, watching their expressions shift as they recognized the wisdom embedded in them. Some would include the quote in their headlines. Others would contemplate it privately, recognizing that it applied not just to this event, but to journalism itself, to life itself. Chuck nodded once to Ray, a farewell between men who understood each other too well to need elaboration, then pushed through the exit door into the cool Las Vegas evening. Ray watched him go, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. To the bewildered official, he said, "That's Chuck Norris for you. Always was a man of few words and perfect timing." Inside the arena, the atmosphere had evolved from shock to celebration. Clips of the encounter were already spreading across social media platforms, commentators struggling to describe what they'd witnessed. Hashtags trending worldwide. Chuck vs. Hurricane. One-punch legend. Respect the elders. In the commentary booth, Elena Vega was providing context for viewers just tuning in. For those joining us after the unexpected intermission, we're still processing what can only be described as a historic moment in combat sports, she explained. Professional demeanor partially restored, though excitement still colored her voice. Chuck Norris. That Chuck Norris just delivered what might be the most technically perfect knockout I've ever witnessed, against an undefeated champion less than half his age. Mike shook his head, still processing. The precision, Elena. That's what I can't get over. Not a wasted movement. Not an ounce of unnecessary force. It wasn't just a physical victory, Elena added, her expression thoughtful. It was philosophical. A masterclass in what martial arts was always meant to be: not spectacle, not dominance, but discipline, self-mastery. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I'm reminded of something my first sensei told me when I was just starting out. He said, "We train not to learn how to fight, but to learn when not to." I didn't understand it then. After tonight, I think I'm beginning to. Mike nodded slowly. You know, there's a whole generation watching tonight who only know Chuck Norris from internet memes, from jokes about how tough he is. And in a strange way, Elena replied, what we saw tonight was both the confirmation and the refutation of those jokes. Yes, he is every bit as formidable as the myths suggest, but not for the reasons popular culture imagines. Not because he's superhuman, but because he spent a lifetime perfecting the most human of pursuits, the mastery of oneself. The main event would still happen. Contracts had been signed, millions invested, but everyone knew it would be an afterthought. The real story had already unfolded. The moment that would be remembered long after tonight's official results faded from memory. In the medical area, Ty Jackson sat motionless on an examination table as doctors prepared to reset his dislocated jaw. The local anesthetic had numbed the immediate pain, but a deeper ache persisted on that no medication could touch. His entourage hovered anxiously nearby: trainers, managers, social media coordinators, all speaking at once, strategizing damage control, planning comeback narratives. We'll frame it as a sucker punch, his PR manager insisted, already drafting statements on her phone. Unauthorized entry into the cage, violation of protocols. I've got calls from 3 networks already, his agent added. We can control the narrative if we move fast. Turn this into a sympathy spike for your brand. The lawyers think we've got a solid case for assault, another voice chimed in. At his age we could. Ty heard none of it. His focus had turned inward, replaying not just the physical defeat, but the quieter, more profound moment that had followed. The old man's eyes. The lack of triumph. The gentle guidance toward healing, both physical and otherwise. The other stuff takes longer to heal, but it can, if you let it. Ego is the heaviest weight we carry. Heaviest to pick up. Hardest to put down. Simple words that had somehow cut through a lifetime of conditioning, of armor building, of conflating dominance with worth. A doctor approached with a syringe. This sedative will help with the pain when we reset the jaw, he explained. You'll feel pressure, but... Ty raised a hand, stopping him. With careful movements, he reached for his phone, typing a message and showing it to his bewildered manager. Cancel post-fight interviews. All of them. But Ty, we need to control the narrative here, the manager protested. Your brand. Ty shook his head once, wincing at the pain but determined. He typed another message. No more brand. Just fighter now. You don't mean that. His agent interjected, alarmed. This is the emotion talking. The concussion. When you've had time to process. Ty's eyes hardened. He typed a third message, holding it up for all of them to see. My career. My choice. Leave now. All of you. The team exchanged uncertain glances, unused to this version of their fighter. The hurricane they knew thrived on attention, on controversy, on the carefully crafted persona they'd all helped build and profit from. This quiet, determined figure was a stranger to them. Let's give him some space, the doctor suggested, sensing the tension. Medical staff only for now. Reluctantly, the entourage filed out, whispering urgently among themselves, casting bewildered glances back at the fighter who had suddenly become unrecognizable to them. Alone with the medical team, Ty set the phone aside and nodded to the doctor, ready for the procedure. As the sedative began to take effect, Ty's thoughts drifted to his earliest training days before the showmanship, before the persona, when he'd loved the pure discipline of martial arts. When a perfect form had meant more than a perfect camera angle. He remembered the quiet satisfaction of mastering a difficult technique, the centering effect of pre-dawn training, alone in the dojo, no audience but himself, the respect he'd once felt for the traditions, for the lineage of knowledge passed from teacher to student across generations. Somewhere along the way, he'd lost that connection, had traded substance for spectacle, respect for fear, mastery for dominance, had forgotten why he'd started this journey in the first place. Perhaps, he thought as consciousness began to blur, it wasn't too late to find his way back to that. As the doctors worked to reset his jaw, Ty's mind drifted to the future, not to championship belts or sponsorship deals or social media followers, but to the long road of rediscovery that stretched before him. The harder path. The quieter path. In that moment of suspended awareness between consciousness and sedation, a strange clarity washed over him. The greatest opponent he would ever face wasn't Chuck Norris or any other fighter. It was himself, the Hurricane. The persona he'd created to protect the vulnerable core beneath. That was the real fight awaiting him. And for the first time in years, he felt ready to face it. Outside the arena, Chuck Norris settled into the back seat of a waiting car. The driver, a middle-aged man with a military haircut, glanced in the rearview mirror, clearly starstruck. "Sir," he began hesitantly, "if you don't mind me asking, what happened in there? My phone's blowing up with notifications about you and the Hurricane." Chuck met his eyes briefly in the mirror, then looked out at the Las Vegas night, the neon glare, the artificial daylight, the perpetual performance that was the Strip. So different from the quiet Texas ranch where he spent most of his time now, teaching select students, practicing daily, living simply. "Just a conversation between martial artists," he said finally. The driver waited for more, but Chuck had already turned his attention to the passing cityscape, his expression contemplative. After a moment, the driver nodded to himself and pulled away from the curb, sensing that further questions would be unwelcome. Chuck's phone buzzed in his pocket, the first of what would likely be hundreds of calls and messages in the coming days. Chuck checked the screen briefly, saw his son's name, and answered. "Yes? Dad." The voice came through, equal parts amused and concerned. "You're trending on every platform. What exactly happened at that tournament?" Chuck smiled slightly. "Tell you when I get home. How's the family?" The abrupt change of subject was characteristic. His son knew better than to press. They spoke briefly about grandchildren, about the upcoming family gathering at the ranch, about everyday matters that anchored real life against the surreal events of the evening. After ending the call, Chuck silenced the device. There would be time for explanations later, or perhaps not. Some things spoke for themselves. The car merged onto the highway, leaving behind the arena where, for a few brief minutes, time had seemed to bend, where age and physics and conventional wisdom had all been suspended in favor of something more enduring. The quiet power of mastery earned through decades of disciplined practice. Chuck closed his eyes, centering himself with a deep breath. In his mind, he was already back at the ranch, moving through his morning forms as the sun rose, finding the same peace he'd carried into the cage tonight. No cameras, no audience, no performance. Just the steady rhythm of breath and movement. The same path he'd walked for over 60 years. The path that had allowed a 79-year-old man to stand before a hurricane and remain unmoved. In the days that followed, the encounter would be analyzed endlessly. Sports scientists would break down the biomechanics of the perfect hook. Martial arts practitioners would debate techniques and approaches. Social media would explode with memes, with reactions, with interpretations. But the true significance lay beyond analysis, beyond viral fame, beyond the spectacle that modern combat sports had become. It lay in the quiet transformation beginning in a young fighter's heart as he reconsidered his path. In the subtle shift in how thousands of practitioners viewed their art after witnessing its highest expression. in the reminder that beneath the commercialization, the glorification of ego, the true essence of martial arts remained unchanged. The lifelong pursuit, not of dominating others, but of mastering oneself. Because real strength doesn't shout. Real mastery needs no introduction. It simply is. 3 months later, at a small dojo in rural Texas, Chuck Norris was guiding a group of students through morning forms when an unexpected visitor arrived. Ty Jackson, his jaw fully healed, stood hesitantly at the entrance, wearing a simple white gi instead of his trademark flashy fight gear. Their eyes met across the training floor. No words were necessary. Chuck nodded once, gesturing to an empty space in the back row. Ty bowed, deeper this time, with perfect form, then took his place among the students. The hurricane was gone. In his place stood simply a martial artist, ready to begin again. Chuck turned back to the class, his expression unchanged, save for the faintest hint of satisfaction in his eyes. "From the beginning," he said quietly. "Foundations first. Up next we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there." If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.